Let's move into the area of mineral valuation. Ali, welcome to Raw Talks.
Thank you very much for having me. Companies export their product, and it's the value of the product at the time of export upon which governments usually levy taxes and royalties. So governments need to be really confident that the value of that exported mineral product is correct. Otherwise, they risk getting less in tax and royalties potentially as well. So it's really important that they have the capacity to be able to verify the value of the minerals leaving their country. And they shouldn't take companies' word for it. They should make sure that they have the information and expertise to be confident that the value is correct. That's not because we're saying that companies are untrustworthy in this regard. It's just that as a government you have a duty to your citizens to make sure that the value of the mineral is correct. One African country that is one of our member governments said to us that they had concerns that a bauxite company operating in their country. So this is one bauxite mine that's selling part of its production to a related party in Europe and the rest to independent customers. And what they're observing is that related party sale is 3 times less in value than to independent customers. Now, there might be a range of commercial reasons to explain that. It could be around the quantity of production, it could be around difference in value, the customer's needs and so forth. There's a range of reasons that need to be considered. But unless governments have the capacity to verify those values, to ask those questions, then they're left being suspicious that they're getting a bad deal.
What options do governments have to prevent this?
So there are a number of different ways that governments can improve their oversight of the value of mineral exports. And in our guidance to governments, we set out 3 options. The first option is directly measuring the value of that export. So what that would look like is setting up a laboratory. So you take a sample of the mineral product from the company, you take it to the lab, you do all sorts of chemical testing and analysis on that sample to determine the contents. So how much iron is in the ore, for example, are there impurities that would decrease the value? So that's the first option, is that government actually takes a sample and directly measures the value. Now that's often costly and resource intensive, right? You've got to set up a laboratory, you've got to maintain it, have the staff, etc. So another option might be to monitor what companies are doing to value their exports. So obviously companies want to know the value of their export as well, right? Because they have to charge their customer on that basis too, and it affects their share price and so forth. So often companies are either doing valuation of the mineral in-house, so they might have their own laboratory in the country, or they might contract a mineral inspection firm, SGS, Cotecna. There's a number of private mineral inspection firms that you would bring in. So if companies are doing that, then government can perhaps monitor those activities to make sure that they comply with international standards and that they're confident about the results from those company processes. So that's obviously less resource intensive, but governments might be concerned that it's a bit more hands-off potentially. And then maybe there's an option in the middle. So maybe there's a hybrid approach which is based on the level of risk. So for example, if you've got a mining company that sells 100% of its mineral product to a related party elsewhere, then you're going to say, well, there's a pretty high risk of undervaluation of the value being understated. So in that instance, we might want to do some direct measurement. We might want to take a sample and maybe we analyse that ourselves, or maybe we send it to an inspection firm elsewhere. But in other cases, you might say, well, this company actually complies with international standards. It's a public listed company. It sells some of its production to a related party, but a lot to independent customers. So actually we think the risk the value of the exports being understated is lower. And so we're just going to monitor what the companies are doing. The reality is we don't have enough data to say. There are certain anecdotal examples, like the one I shared earlier, where we have a government that's comparing sales to a related party and to independent customers and saying, why is there such a big difference here, and what is the loss for us as government in terms of revenue. So there are anecdotal examples, but there's not enough to say, kind of give a global estimate on this. I think one thing we do need to be very careful about is not overstating the risk as well. So there is a risk, and government has an obligation to make sure that it's confident. Otherwise, suspicion will erode the relationship between government and investors, and it will undermine investors' license to operate. So from that point of view, it's really important that governments get up to speed on this where they feel that they're not.
Great. Thank you very much for joining Raw Talks.
My pleasure.